on Jughead, and it's a long time later, and I have short hair and no beard, and I am no longer in Osaka, Japan. I am in Chicago, Illinois, in my house, also the place of the Jughead's basement. I'm going to tackle How to Make Enemies and Irritate People, the Screeching Weasel album that came out in August of 1994 and was recorded. You'll hear about it later, but it was recorded next door to my house in Logan Square in Panic's basement. It's called Panic's basement. So we have a thing about basements, I guess. The length is 27 minutes and 56 seconds. Rounding up, that would be 28. It turns out I stalled out on this record because I don't know. I don't know. Probably because I was moving back from Japan to Chicago, and also because I don't remember much of these songs. They don't really resonate with me that much. But luckily, I reached out to Mass Georginee and Dan Panic on this one, and I have copious notes, so I'll probably be actually reading a lot instead of talking freely with my eyes looking at you through this digital camera on my computer. Yes. Also, I tried to get Mike Dirnt to be on this one, and that's one of the other reasons I waited so long to release it. Me and Mass were trying to get Mike to we actually did get a hold of Mike, because Mike and Mass Georginee are in communication quite often. And he said he wanted to do it, but he got busy. Green Day just put out a new record, and they're touring, so he kept on putting it off. And then eventually I just couldn't wait any longer, and I wanted to get this one out of the way anyway. So I'm moving forward. Hopefully, maybe if we get some notes from Mike, if he gets some time. He's a very busy guy, of course. One of the biggest bands in the world. I will actually either maybe do an video addendum, or just write in the comments his notes that he is going to give me. I would also like to say that me and Dan Panic had a little to-do after the last one, and then after a blog I had written. Very justified in Panic's side. I just didn't say much about him in a lot of these, and had said stuff a while ago on a blog that I took away about him being not very pertinent to the band. I don't remember writing that, but I could see how we might get that feeling, and I don't feel that at all. I like many people, think probably the most exciting the band had been was during the Panic, Vapid, Weasel, and Jughead days. I don't think we put out the best songs or the best played songs, but it was definitely the most charismatic the band was, and probably the only time it was really, to me, a band, like during the My Brain Hurts and Wiggle time period. So I'm going to launch right into this, and apologize to Panic for not bringing him up enough, I think, on these. So I definitely went on my way to get notes from him. So I'm going to start with the notes from Panic, and maybe I'll add in things as I'm reading these to you, the audience. So Panic has quite a few here, and I also have a couple of notes for myself that I may or may not talk about, but let's see. Panic notes. Here we go. This is words from Dan Panic. How to Make Enemies and Irritate People, at the time, was to be Screeching Weasel's swan song. It remained, from my personal experience, the most enjoyable Screeching Weasel album to record. There seemed to be a collective relief of the proverbial weight being lifted off our shoulders, and band relations were actually, in a rare occurrence, harmonious. I wouldn't disagree with that. For me, it wasn't the funnest time. This is the one where I didn't have hardly anything to do with the recording process of it, whereas in all the records beforehand, I was pretty much there for all of the recording and most of the mixing, except for Anthem for a New Tomorrow, which took place in California with Andy Ernst. So I return. Let's go on with Panic. I remember recording it in the dilapidated basement of where I and my esteemed roommate Elise lived at the time in Logan Square. Um, that's true. They used to live actually right under me in my apartment. I think that's actually when I think Green Day actually used to stay down in their apartment a lot, and that's I think when Panic and Green Day became more friends. It's like, but I was upstairs, and they were just another band at the time, so I never really got to know them that much. But he moved from the apartment below me to next door. I think that's the case. I think he lived down there. Pretty sure, or at least did at least. Um, Logan Square is a much safer neighborhood now than it was then, he says. It seemed an unfathomable place to record an album for an acoustic engineering standpoint, and I'm sure if people were to have been witness to our surroundings, they'd probably begin to wonder if Lookout Records gave us a $100 recording budget to finish the blasted thing. Um, as I go on, the first day was set aside for Mass, the kindest and most patient engineer-producer I have ever encountered, to set up his mobile recording unit and to attempt at procuring a decent drum sound in a sonically unforgiving basement from a sonically threadbare drum kit. Then start recording drum tracks on day 2. Surprisingly, things were going better than expected on this first day, and Ben had his guitar and a microphone set up in the same room as me for a scratch guitar and vocal. We started drum tracking at 10 minutes to 4 in the afternoon, and by 5 minutes to 7 in the evening, we had all 12 drum tracks for the album. The tracks for what became Susan is Getting Married, a 7-inch, and a version of the song Nightbreed, finished. A day, way ahead of schedule. Time and money saved! Exclamation point. Day 2 was for John and Ben to record their respective guitar tracks, and approximately a week later, Mike Dirnt was to arrive to record bass. Mike, for those of you who may not be familiar with obscure Bay Area punk rock trivia, is in the band Green Day. Great stuff. You should check them out. Very generously volunteered to play on the album in between his commitments to said band. When he arrived, Ben and John and I rehearsed with him in the basement makeshift recording studio so he could become familiar with the songs and us. I guess I'll just break in here to say that Ben and Mike pretty much arranged that whole thing. Ben knew that Mike was a fan of the band, and I think before this, he wore the shirt that I had silk screened with the Weasel logo on it on stage at Woodstock. So it became pretty well known. Maybe that was after. That might have been after this. I don't know. Before or after. But we knew he was a big fan of the band. So he flew out. And he was busy at the time because Dookie had just come out. And I remember taking him to a music store in Wrigleyville to get some bass strings, and they weren't as big as they became. They were just starting to percolate, and I remember everyone in this music store knew who he was, and they made him play some songs on his bass. It was kind of cool. It's kind of cool. I got to know Mike pretty good just in that one day because I drove him around in the van, and I learned that he liked stand-up comedy and wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And in my book, I kind of made I don't know what in some of the stuff in that book, I wish I could rewrite because I wanted it to be sort of lovingly criticizing people, but I criticized him for not really being that funny and that he should stick to playing bass. But I thought it was very genuine of him to tell me some of his jokes that I don't remember in the van. But I remember thinking, well, that's a good thing he's a good bass player, which he is. Now I will go back to Panic here. The next 2 days were spent recording bass, vocals, backing vocals. I could hear the workings of the album come to fruition 2 flights up in my abode, while my landlord and his family suffered through the whole ordeal 1 floor below me. Everyone involved with the album would occasionally come up, take breaks when the mood or bodily functions beckoned. Mike spent his last night before leaving for greener pastures, pun intended, he says, teaching me some guitar some guitar chords on guitar. Thank you, Mike, for your patience, and you'd be pleased as pumpkin seeds that my guitar playing has progressed significantly since then, says Panic. There was an unsuspected aftermath post, how to make enemies and irritate people. The punk scene was, in short, to garner mainstream attention in the days of recording in dilapidated places with dilapidated musical equipment on shoestring budgets. He makes a joke here. I'm going to read it, but my apologies toward shoestrings and anyone related to shoestrings that may be offended by the phrase. We're about to change for us and others within punk rock significantly. Expectations changed as well. Hell, it was the first time we were to encounter expectations unheard of beforehand. And sadly, it was during this recording the last time I saw Mass's father, Aldo Georginee, a truly great man. Yes, Aldo was a big, was an important person in our lives, and of course in Mass Georginee's life. He was a very intelligent, he was an artist, and he was also an engineer, and he taught in Purdue, where Mass and Aldo and Flav, Mass's brother Flav, all grew up in Lafayette, Indiana. And during this record, Aldo had a brain tumor and came to visit us while we were recording in the basement. And I remember him coming in, and I think his head was shaved at the time. He had a lovely head of like wavy black hair, and his hair was cut. And we all went to a Mexican restaurant that was at the corner of my street in Logan Square, which was called, I think I even wrote this down, didn't I? Abril. Yes, it's gone now. And there's also an all-night diner right near it called Johnny's. But it was sad. It was sad. It was bittersweet, knowing that this would probably be the last time we would see him. He was very supportive of all the bands. He used to go to all the shows that his band would play, both with Rat Tail Grenadier and Squirt Gun. So he meant a lot to all of us, and that's why Ben decided that his artwork would be the cover of the record Television City Dream. Now I'm going to go on to Mass Georginee's notes. He's got a lot of notes, so maybe I will find things to put in between these. Also, I don't know if I mentioned that I'm going to worry less about talking about the individual songs in this one. This one, even more than all the others, were a product of Ben Weasel lyrics and almost all the music too, so I don't feel comfortable even beginning to talk about any of the songs, except for maybe memories that come up surrounding the song, but not about the lyrics or the writing of the songs in themselves at all. So here's Mass's notes. How to Make Enemies and Irritate People was the only Screeching Weasel album to have the guitars down-tuned a half step. This was a result of a conversation between Mike and Ben with regard to some of the songs being a bit tougher to sing because of their high key. Mike informed Ben that Green Day played all songs down-tuned that half step, and Ben decided to try it for that album. I would not have remembered that at all. I actually like the idea of tuning differently. I talked to Promise Ring extensively about that when I did the podcast for them, and I accidentally forgot to actually put that segment in their podcast. But I've always been interested in that, and I'm also a big fan of Nick Drake, who almost changes the tuning for every single song he does. So next note from Mass. This was the first album I recorded on the Leaping Lizard mobile division of Sonic Iguana. It was a great experiment. It was also the only one I ever mixed that way, using the original mix console of Sonic Iguana, which had been used to record albums such as Screeching Weasels' Wiggle, Ramones, and Anthem for a New Tomorrow albums, as well as the Queers' Love Songs for the Retarded and Squirt Gun's original recording of Social for the Mallrats soundtrack. I will talk about soundtracks a little bit later when I talk about the songs. So here's Mass's next note. Also, it could be said here that Ben increasingly more and more did not enjoy being in the studio. So I think this, yes, this is the last record of Screeching Weasel where he would actually be in the studio for most of the time. Afterwards, starting with Kill the Musician, no, not starting with Bark Like a Dog, he was hardly ever in the studio. He would, write the songs, teach them to all of us, and then I think we would send him. We probably had internet by then. I don't know, but would send him all the songs so far, and then at least for Bark Like a Dog, we all went to the mixing and mastering of that. But I'll talk more about that later when we get to that record. So here's a longer one by Mass. During the recording of the vocals, I left the lead vocal mic recording at several points, and during one of these times, Ben broke wind. I'm sure he also made a comment to that effect, and seemed rather bemused with himself for the hearty tone and volume of his flatulence. It is important to keep in mind that the vocal mic was placed for proper recording of Ben's vocals, and that the fart obviously came from his hindquarters. Therefore, for it to be captured so well, it required great volume and sustain. Enough to resonate throughout the basement room we used as the vocal booth. I'll just pause here to say that Mass is really getting off on this because he loves talking about, potty humor. I mean, even though he's like one of the smartest guys I know, he just loves talking about poop and shit. Okay, so go back. Throughout the basement room we used as the vocal booth, and still be received by the mic clearly enough to register on the VU meters. Fortunately, this small burst of genius had the necessary force, and it, along with the reverberation, were recorded and preserved for prosperity, for Ben's posterior. However, Ben did not know at the time I was recording him. I saved it with the thought of throwing it into the final album edit on my own, as a surprise. While we mixed the album at Ben's apartment, I did the sequence and editing at Sonic Iguana, at which time I pulled in the fart and tacked it on the beginning. That is also when I pulled out the line by Ben, I said, I think that's it, and I don't even want to try it again, which he said after a take on one of the tunes of the album. And I put it at the end of the album. Of course, Ben did hear those two editions before I sent it out for mastering. This album was recorded shortly before I began mastering, and he ended up liking them. But the adventure with the fart was not yet over, ... See, he goes on and on about this fart thing, because that's what Mass likes. ... A few weeks later, I got a call from the then label president, Chris Applegren at Lookout Records, saying that he had received a message from the mastering house that there was a strange digital glitch at the beginning of the mixed album sequence, just after the first start ID, and that I needed to send a new copy. I thought about it quickly, at first momentarily concerned that there was something actually wrong with the master tape, and then answered, "Oh no, I know what you're talking about. That's just a fart." Chris then answered, "Well, I don't know the technical names for these things. I just know there's a problem and we need a new D8 DAT ASAP." And then Mass says, "I was on the verge of bursting out in laughter when I tried to be more explicit. No, there's nothing technical needed to explain the sound. Ben was just quite flatulent that day. He'd literally farted." Chris was still perplexed and flatly stated, "I don't understand." Then Mass says, "Fortunately, within the next few sentences, all was cleared up. To make matters even more interesting and absurd, when the album was eventually released a few months later, there were a fair number of confused fans that made similar comments and even tried to exchange their copies of the album for new, non-defective ones." So that's what we get for putting a fart sound at the beginning of that record. Then Mass, Mass has got two more here. This was something he wrote a little bit later when we were waiting for Mike's note still. So Mass added, "One last note from my enemies. A pair of the songs were recorded during the How to Make Enemies session, needed to be finished and sent to pressing sooner than the rest. Susan is getting married and Waiting for Susie, as they were being released as a 7-inch. While we made sure to record Mike Dirnt's bass before Susan's actual wedding." Yes, we actually recorded a record for people that were getting married in California to be released at their wedding anniversary. At their wedding. We put off waiting for Susie, figuring we had time. In the end, Mike had to fly off to perform on the David Letterman show, and I ended up playing the bass on the song, although Mike did sing the backing vocals on it. The final Susie Suzanne release has bass playing by me on one side and Mike Dirnt on the other. And then he's got a final note. I also ended up playing on another song recorded during these sessions, Nightbreed. Ben didn't like the bass line that Mike had recorded, feeling that it was too busy and interfered with the lead vocal line. Therefore, he asked me to re-record it. Somebody had asked me about that earlier, and I didn't know for sure. I think there was sometimes that information about that one song. Sometimes the gossip grows, and it turned into that Mike had all of it, like almost all of his stuff, had been re-recorded, but that's not true at all. It was just this one song. And you might have just heard it, but the Cubs are playing tonight, and the guy I own the house with just stamped on the ceiling up there and went, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Anyway, Ben didn't like the bass line Mike had, feeling that it was too busy and interfered with the lead vocal. Therefore, he asked me to re-record it. Ultimately, it was cut from the album anyway, and the recording only appeared years later as part of Thank You Very Little compilation for rare Weasel tracks. However, the song itself was released sooner as part of 1998's major label debut, EP, an entirely new recording by a different Weasel lineup, with Ben and John accompanied by Dan Lumley on drums, Zach Damon on guitar and backing vocals, and me on bass, me being Mass. So those were Mass's notes. This might be a really short one, but at least I will have gotten it done. So I'm going to look at my random notes around over here and see if there's anything that I want to add to this. Well, first I will let's go through the songs and see if I have anything to say about any of these. Probably not much of them. Planet of the Apes, no. 99, there's this already. There's a lot of references to TV, and Ben used to watch a lot of TV. We all used to watch a lot of TV in the 80s and early 90s in the suburbs. I Hate Your Guts on Sunday, Nothing to Say. Johnny, Are You Queer? Was a cover song, and what I'll say about that is that I think Ben liked to put my names in songs because he knew it made me a little bit uncomfortable. I don't really know why he did it. Maybe it was his ode to me that I was his sort of partner in the band, or I don't know. But it did happen a couple times with Johnny and Joni and Johnny, Johnny and Joni, and then there's the cover of the Johnny, Are You Queer? On the outside of the album, they're all just there's fake titles which Ben decided to do. I think it was a sort of a punk thing to say that. I think people were talking about having arguments about barcodes and all this stuff about what was punk and what wasn't punk, because of Green Day breaking it big in Nirvana. I think this was sort of like a fuck you to, actually information on the outside of a record that made sense. I think our names for the record were wrong too. I'm going to actually look that up. You guys probably know this already, but now I'm interested. How to meet enemies, MEAT, like the meat. How to make enemies and irritate people. Let's see if that's there. I'm going to look at images. Let's see. There it is. Does it have our names on there? Oh no. Isn't this the one? I thought this was the one that had fake names. Oh, might for the album version. Oh, here it is, the album version. No, that's the CD version. I don't know. I thought there were fake names for us too, but maybe not. Who cares? You guys probably know that stuff anyway. Okay. So moving on. Let's see. Time Bomb, nothing. Burnout Girl, nothing. If I Was You, nothing. Nobody Likes You, nothing. Degenerate. Degenerate, I think, is a really cool song. But what I wanted to say about Degenerate is that after this record, we were already not really a band. We weren't bringing Mike on, to be in the band with us, Mike Dirnt. We just weren't going to reform the band again. We lost Vapid. I told Ben that I thought it was a mistake. A lot of the firings of the band beforehand were legitimate to me, and I think made sense. But those two had been living together, and he was Vapid was having a little bit of trouble and coming late to rehearsals, and I don't know. I think Ben might have just been done with the band anyways and looking for an excuse. So he said that he was going to get rid of Vapid, and I was like, well, you know him better than me, because he actually said that it would probably be better for Vapid at that time. Maybe he was trying to justify in his mind, but I was a little bit too passive on this one, and I just said, well, he knew the situation with Vapid more than I did. I didn't hang out with him, and him and Ben used to hang out all the time. So we got rid of him, and but I said then, I did say that I thought it was a bad idea, that he was an important part of the band, and he was. But anyway, what happened during that? Well, I got screwed. Is the band broke up, and I think Ben wrote in notes that I wanted to work on theater and other stuff, but I had been doing theater and music throughout the whole band anyway, so it wasn't. I think that was just kind of a thing to say to justify us not performing anymore. And then through some weird circumstances, Mass introduced Ben to the original bass player in Riverdale's band. I thought he wrote about that, but I didn't see it in this writing here. What was her name? Because she was also in the Gorgor Girls with me and Ben and Russ. It doesn't say here. I can't remember her name right now. Maybe I'll put it in the notes afterwards. I thought Mass had written about this, but he obviously hasn't. But anyway, so she was in the band with Panic and Ben, and then her and Ben had some conflicts, and it was decided she would leave the band, and then Vapid got back in the band, which I thought was crazy, and I kind of felt like I was stabbed in the back in that one. And still to this day, I can't even listen to Riverdale's because I felt like I got screwed out of that one. I screwed on many ways, because when me and Ben worked a lot, I think it was this sort of. I think the two of us had an integrity together that we put each other in like checks and balances, sort of a punk aesthetic, and it wasn't always right, but we were really strict about what would happen to our music. And we liked to be in control of everything. I was kind of the accountant of the band, and he was the lawyer, so all our contracts and all of our accounting and all checks were paid from us. We had no agents or anything like that. So we dealt directly with all the record labels and did all the tours. But I think once the Riverdales happened, he must have loosened up a bit like that, because he asked to be on tour with Green Day, and then he started asking a lot of Lookout for promotion, and he did a European tour, which we would have done as a band. He didn't want to tour at all. And then how I started. This song "Degenerate" was asked to be in the movie Angus, but since the band was broke up, Ben wanted to push the Riverdales instead, so they used the song "Back to You." Which, I mean, is a good song, so I'm not denying that. I have listened to that song. But I thought I got screwed on that too. But the funny thing was, maybe if Ben and I were together, we may not have actually pursued a movie soundtrack, because we probably would have kept ourselves in sort of that punk checks and balances. What else do I got here? Surf Goddess, that was written by Joe King and Ben. I didn't really like that song. I think it's so much better as a Queers song. Then his response to Billy Joe with "I Wrote Holden Caulfield." That was a big book to Ben, The Catcher in the Rye. He sort of was Holden Caulfield. I mean, he really was. I never really related that book. I didn't have the sort of rebellious childhood that a lot of other punks had. My family was, in chaos, and there's lots of violence, so mine was more about clinging to my mother and, trying to be the good one, to try to keep it together a little bit more. So I didn't have that need for rebellion, I think, from a young age. Now let's see if there's any more notes I got here that I have not said. I got one more sheet of notes here before I say goodbye to you, my audience. I will be a little bit more prepared for the next one, which will be, I think it's probably Bark Like a Dog. I don't think the Mopes had recorded yet, so I think I'll be sticking with the Weasel parts. So what else did I put here? How could you... That was it. I had, when I started writing these notes, I was really sort of down on the relationship between me and Ben, and now I just, I'm not feeling it as much anymore. I have my 50th birthday coming up, and I'm going to have a lot of fun with people, so I'm not as in a dark mood, but I did have one where, I often get the question, how could you deal with the asshole Ben Weasel for so long? And I often get that in interviews, and it hit me a little while later. I don't know if I brought this up in this last podcast, but it always bothered me, that question. Not because I didn't think he was an asshole. I mean, he could be hard to deal with, but he was my friend. But the question comes from the point of view of someone like, why are you in his band for so long? But I think what confused me about the question is that it was my band too, so it didn't make sense to say, why were you with this asshole for so long? It was that I was in my band. I was in my band with the other guy who started the band. So it wasn't about, how could you be with this asshole for so long? It was more about, it was our baby. So I dealt with whatever dysfunctional families deal with, because you're the family. That's your family. So that's all I'll say on that. I will be more prepared for the next ones. But for now, this is John Jughead Pearson signing off from his home in Chicago, Illinois, Jefferson Park, United States. Goodbye. And now I will awkwardly try to find out how to turn this off. Goodbye again.